Well, I got to tell you, I don't know what this next half hour is going to be like. I have no idea, but I like that at the end of the week. Andy Thibault is with us, and he has written a new book, or, put together a compilation of things that he has worked on for so many years. It's called More Cool Justice, and it's a biting group of witty and on-the-mark columns, according to those who have been promoting this book. But more importantly, this is a guy who has been around the Connecticut scene for so many years, and he's done such incredible work trying to protect our access to public documents, and a guy who really attempts to make certain that the person on the bottom is getting something of a fair shot when it comes to justice and politics and all that goes on in the state of Connecticut. And I got to ask you, Andy, if you were to sum up your career, because I was thinking about this all night, how do I tell people exactly what this man has done? You've been with virtually every newspaper here in the state of Connecticut. You've written for magazines. You've written on stories here in Connecticut, stories that are far away. And, how do we define your career?
Well, it kind of beats the hell out of me, but I started as a sports writer, and I just had a lot of fun the whole time. And I had great colleagues and teachers throughout my career.
But, you have taken on a lot of muckraking that others seemingly would have lost interest in or been pushed off of by their editors. Mm-hmm. You were an editor, of course, for the Hartford Courant, other places. Tell us what you are most proud of in your career of editorializing, of writing. What is it that you're most proud of?
Well, I did help a couple people get out of jail, and, that makes me feel like I did something after striking out 98 times out of 100.
How hard is it to go up against the criminal justice system in a state like Connecticut to get information, to right wrongs? How difficult? You say it's more difficult dealing with the kind of the lawyerly crowd and the justice crowd than it is even if you've got a corrupt cop. It's even more difficult.
Well, the judges put the cops to shame as far as corruption goes, and they hide things better. They have more resources. But the first case which showed me how the system works was a cover-up of the Showalter hit and run in New London. And Judge Angelo Santinello, who's still alive, tipped off his best friend, Harvey Maloff, that he was a suspect. The late state's attorney, C. Robert Sadai, brought in a phony suspect to try to derail Joseph Danahy's grand jury. They had auto body putty that fell from the death car that a tow truck driver gave to New London cops. And when the state police took over at the behest of El Grasso, the state police went to New London PD, Lieutenant K.T. Bucko. He pulls out the file for the auto body putty, and it's a bathroom tile.
Well, when you look at this, how do you look then at almost any proceeding that goes on in the state of Connecticut when you read just a straight-ahead account by Associated Press or one of the newspapers today? Do you look at it with a different kind of discerning eye and a critical evaluation of whether we're actually getting the real story?
Well, we're not getting the real story. Occasionally we do. There are good reporters with AP who I've worked with and I admire and respect, and there's people like that at every paper in Connecticut. When I was an editor, I would have people draw straws, and the short sticks would do their regular drudgery, and the long stick would disappear for a few days and come back with something good. I think that's the simplest way. You shouldn't be churning out crap that nobody cares about.
Well, you wrote for everybody. The Bulletin, Shoreline newspapers, a place in Pennsylvania, The Advocate in Stamford, Greenwich Time, the Hartford Courant, Torrington Register, Washington Times, Connecticut Post. You couldn't keep a job, Andy.
That's right. I have a short attention span, and I haven't been fired from that many places that I can remember.
No, not at all. But now, recently, we ran into you because you've been doing so much work on freedom of information here in the state of Connecticut. And I recall some articles that you had written. It was for the group that the New Haven Register is a part of. Are you still with them? I'm
kind of still with them, mostly pro bono, but we have a good relationship. They've been good to me, and I like them.
Okay, now, how hard is it? You won a big award by the Connecticut Council on the Freedom of Information, the Stephen Collins Award, which really reflects the fact that you are dogged and determined to get information from these public files, and yet you have been talking over the recent years about how much more difficult that is becoming. Why is that, since we were the original Sunshine State? I mean, why is
Well, Connecticut, every branch of government has screwed FOI, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. There hasn't been anybody in the executive branch behind FOI since El Grasso.
So everybody's been trying to curtail it ever since.
Yeah, I mean, Governor Malloy did this combination thing, and they cut staff, and now, from what I can see, the staff is demoralized. They don't even. I heard that they're even telling people not to bring so many cases because it's killing their budget. The big thing that's wrong is the Attorney General lets these assistant Attorney Generals represent agencies that are hiding public records. That shouldn't be an automatic. The Attorney General should look at each case and not let them go forward if they're hiding public records. You'd solve a lot of problems there.
Okay, the book is called More Cool Justice by the author of Law and Justice in Everyday Life, Andy Thibault, and you should see the people who have acknowledged his work. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. F. Lee Bailey among them, saying that you've got a really unique resource here in the state of Connecticut, a real old-school muckraker, and that this is a guy that you should listen to and respect. What's the hardest work you've ever done, trying to dig something out from a public source that did not want to cooperate with you? What's the toughest assignment you've had?
Well, I'll just mention a couple cases, and if I could give a little backdrop. The special prosecutor for that hit and run in New London was Austin McGuigan, who later became chief state's attorney, and then when he convicted 2 members of the O'Neill administration, he was fired. So what kind of message does that send? If you look at 2 of the hottest cases in Connecticut in recent years, the Badaracco case and the Smolinski case, there are forces at play in the hierarchy of the state police, the chief state's attorney, and others who are a hindrance to prosecution in the Badaracco case. They could have arrested a lot more people in that, but they stopped.
Remind us of that case, because I don't think we've
Well, Mary
really...
Badaracco disappeared about 30 years ago, maybe more, I forget. But her car windshield was smashed, and the state police saw it, and then they didn't do anything with it, and then they never saw it again. There's been a few digs about it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you got a judge in that case who admits he goes to a luncheon with judges to find out what's going on in a grand jury, and then he tips off the murder suspect, and they all walk.
So now, what about the Smolinski case? Because I know John Murray at the Waterbury Observer has been doing a lot of work keeping this in the public's mind, and I know that there's been legislation proposed in Washington related to missing persons because of his mother. I mean, what's going on with that case? Where does it stand?
Well, I need to catch up big time, but John Murray knows a lot more than I do. I just filed the FOI to get the police report that Waterbury police did virtually nothing for a year. But they hid the report. They drove by a spot where they got a tip that Billy Smolinski was strangled and buried. Maybe they waved hi to the trees. I don't know what else they did. And but Murray tells me there were some cops who tried to pursue it. Again, he knows more than I do. But there's a lot of dead bodies connected with the Smolinski case. There was a bodyguard for a rich guy in Florida who washed up on shore in Long Island with another guy. He's related to the suspect who died from a heroin hotshot. So to pursue this, you'd have to have vigorous, open-minded detectives turn loose from the state police. And I don't see any evidence that you have that now.
Well, you wrote a history of the state police in Connecticut. That goes back several years. I mean, if you had to update that story, I don't know if you've thought about doing that, I mean, what would you say about the incorruptibility of our state police?
I would say there are many troopers and detectives who are among the greatest people I've ever met. They will do the right thing without regard to their personal well-being. And the best detectives I know, from Michael Malchik, who solved the Michael Ross case, to some others in these other cases I mentioned, they've been punished for trying to pursue the case, and it's wrong.
They have been punished for that. In what ways?
I'm just going to say that for now.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about Woody Allen.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been on his case for a while. This slippery tap dance, this is part of the More Cool Justice book, and it's really hard to define the book because there's so many different kinds of stories in it. But tell us about Woody Allen here in the state of Connecticut. You think he's gotten away with a lot more than he should have?
Well, it's not really funny, but the striking thing about the Woody Allen case is he made so many people rich. I mean, he had private investigators tail Mia Farrow's children from Bridgewater to the Danbury Mall and, see what kind of candy they bought. And these guys charged like a few $100 an hour. And they had many different teams of PIs from big firms in New York who would try to dig up dirt on the prosecutors and the state police detectives. And they were all under the leadership of Elkan Abramowitz, very connected guy in New York, whose wife is a novelist and a good writer, but I forgot her name.
So what are you saying when we start reading these stories on page 6 in the New York Post, and you see some of these Farrow children, back and forth with Woody Allen? How should we frame this case in our own minds?
Well, the state's attorney, Frank Mako, had an arrest warrant presented to him. He said he had probable cause to make an arrest, but he couldn't proceed without harming the young child who was the alleged victim. And he took a lot of heat for telling the truth, that he did have probable cause. He could have made an arrest, but the child was not up to a trial at that time.
Okay, so there is something here that perhaps has gone unaddressed over the years in terms of Woody Allen.
Absolutely.
All right. Let me ask you, it's so funny. You talk about coincidences, and we were interviewing, of course, Kevin Boylan. We're going to go all over the place with Andy here today. And you happen to be, even though he wasn't, though I was led to believe he was at the Assassination Archive and Research Center's convention in Bethesda over the weekend, talking about the assassination of President Kennedy.
Right.
And tell us the most beguiling
Well, I met a guy from a Cuban hit squad, Antonio Vesiana, who ran Alpha 66, which made 2 attempts on the life of Fidel Castro, unsuccessful. And he made his first public statement. He said, "I'm 86." This is a paraphrase. The United States is an empire. It needs to protect its interests. No intelligence agency has ethics. They do what they have to do. But I don't agree with killing a president. And he stated publicly that he went to a meeting with fellow CIA agent David Atlee Phillips, and you'll never guess who was there. Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, the other people who spoke here were Robert Blakey of Notre Dame, the professor who ran the House Assassination Committee, and he's evolved in his thinking. He came out and said you have to look at RFK and JFK together to see who killed them. Cyril Wecht, the pathologist, was a speaker. Numerous speakers, investigators from House assassinations. There were shots from different directions. There were multiple shooters.
So
that was the presentation.
In the minds of people who were there, I mean, did this change minds? You said that the professor from Notre Dame starting to rethink what it was.
He's evolved over the years. He was pretty cautious and conservative in what he would say going back to the House panel, but he was much more forceful and direct, linking the RFK and JFK assassination.
So how important was that piece of information coming from this elderly Cuban gentleman?
Well, it's huge. I mean, what is he doing meeting with Lee Harvey Oswald and a fellow CIA agent? And Lee Harvey Oswald was highly trained related to reconnaissance of the U-2 spy plane. It goes back and forth to Russia. You know, you don't do that unless you're connected. You know?
And do you think that we need more cooperation? You heard probably on the way in Mr. Boylan saying, well, if a true historian were looking at this, they would want real documentation. I mean, is it something that we need to further go back and investigate whether that meeting really took place and what happened?
Sure. I mean, don't take anything at face value, but Congress passed a law to give out all these records quite a few years ago, and the CIA is violating the law by not giving them out.
Now, let me ask you, when you're investigating something, how do you know that you're not being used in the process? In other words, by either party.
Right.
I mean, you get very much involved.
Well, you have to be skeptical, and you have to be, you pursue whatever path you get, but then you have to step back and be indifferent, like not even care.
But haven't you gotten emotionally involved, or are you really involved in cool justice, which is, of course, your writing? I mean, or do you get passionately involved in these cases?
Well, I mean, if I'm fired up, I can't stop working, you know.
But, I mean, do you let your emotions at all get in the way, or do you let the facts take you wherever they're going to take you?
Well, I can't mess up on the facts, then I have no credibility, so I'm careful what I state as a fact. But as a columnist, I have a point of view, so I can make a judgment or have an opinion. You know?
What's harder to do, because you've written a lot of opinion pieces over the years, versus writing something that is an investigative story that you're pursuing with a lot of intent? I mean, what's harder?
Well, they used to train people by writing obituaries, because if you mess that up, you get the whole family mad at you. And that's a good way to learn the facts.
So do you think that that's harder to get it right?
Yeah, to do a straight news story and not mess it up is quite an achievement, I think.
How should people read the news these days? I've had people come on and say, well, you know, the corporate media, they're all bought and paid for. They're told what it is they can report on, what they can't. I mean, with the pressures in the newsroom today, and a lot of people having left the newsroom because there's just no money to pursue certain things, how should we be in terms of a reader? You know, how skeptical should we be?
Well, you should be very skeptical and read a wide range of publications. But there's good people, even in corporate newsrooms, who somehow get good stories in. You can have John Lender up here soon. And
yeah, he'll be with us on Monday.
Yeah.
John Murray's going to be with us on Monday, too.
Yeah, and the New Haven Register Group people, they let me write what I wanted to write, and I'm very grateful for that.
Now, let me ask you, what's exciting you today? I mean, you've got a lot of your stories and a collection in More Cool Justice, but what is it that you're pursuing now, that you're running down, or a story in the state of Connecticut that you think really needs to be pursued?
Well, I've been in a different mindset. My publisher is called Icebox Publishing of Westport. And
yeah, tell us about them. I mean, I hadn't heard of them before.
I got a signing at the Hickory Stick Bookshop.
Okay, we'll talk about that on
Friday.
October 10th.
Yeah, but it was formed by an Air Force veteran who was a limo driver for SEAL Team 6. Then he drove a helicopter, or flew a helicopter, whatever. And he worked as a bond trader in the Caribbean. His name is Todd Wood. And then he cranked out a few novels. And I just edited a book by a friend of ours that's going to be on Kindle any moment. It's by Dr. Joe Bentavania, an eye surgeon from Rocky Hill, who did a year volunteering in Haiti, like taking care of lepers and, kids dying from all the diseases of poverty. And it's a very compelling book about what it's like to try to help people in that kind of situation. And a woman who wrote the prologue is Avery Doniger from the famous douchebag free speech case, who's a veteran volunteer in Haiti, went to school in Africa, and now she has a master's degree in some kind of public service area. She's been rebuilding houses on Staten Island. But she was on the ground in Haiti 3 or 4 times helping out, and she wrote the new prologue for the 7th edition.
Wow, that's amazing. You've also had a great friendship with someone like Wally Lamb. I mean, tell us how important you think his relationship has been.
Well, I mean, what a good guy. He's an unknown English teacher, goes on Oprah, New York Times bestseller. He goes to teach a class at the Niantic Jail for women, and then he leaves, and they say, where are you going? And then, I don't know if that was like 10 years ago, and he said, well, write something. If you write this, I'll come back. And then he published those two books, by the women of the Niantic jail, and very compelling stuff, and that's how I got to meet Bonnie Forshaw.
What do you think about the criminal justice system in America? I mean, there's lots of debates about whether we're locking too many people up.
Well, we absolutely are. We lock up more people than any country per capita. You go to school in Avon, you're going to the Ivy League. You go a few miles down the road, you're going to jail. I mean, there's something to do with housing, race, economic opportunity. You look at who's in jail. It's in the women's jail, the vast majority have been raped or molested, poor people, and it's poor people of color who are in jail. And I credit the leadership now and the executive with trying to turn that around. It costs a lot less to train somebody than it does to lock them up and dehumanize them.
And there's a lot of that going on all across America. People are recognizing that we've got to be a lot more, careful about who it is that we're locking up and for what reason to justify it and the cost to society long term.
And this place, Walker, where they have sensory deprivation, it even drives the guards nuts. So that place should be destroyed.
Well, you've been following this Jane Doe case
in
the state of Connecticut.
You got a kid who's a transgender kid, not convicted of a crime, but held. No due process rights as a juvenile. I think it's one of the great human rights issues for Connecticut today that has been botched totally by DCF and Joette Katz.
What do you think about what the commissioner has been doing? Lots of articles back and forth about the way we're treating children in the state of Connecticut.
Well, Jane Doe's legal team has said they found viable foster parents. Let the kid go out, and if the foster parents can't handle it, we'll find out what happens. But, I mean, this isn't helping anybody, locking a kid up with no charges. I mean, come on.
So when you look around at the criminal justice system, when you look at the judges here in the state of Connecticut, you read about a whole new batch of political types who are now judges of the Superior Court. I mean, how do you react? I mean, what do you say?
Well, they're not all bad people.
Right,
I mean,
of course.
I got a chapter on good judges and gong show judges and good cops and deranged cops. But I know some judges that I respect.
And when you look in at Ferguson, Missouri, is that an outlier situation, or is that just the tip of the iceberg as you look down there?
Well, there's plenty of data on racial profiling in Connecticut. You don't have to go to Missouri to see that.
And tell us what that racial profiling looks like here in the state of Connecticut.
If you're a black guy, you get pulled over. If you're a white guy, you keep driving.
Okay. More cool justice. We're talking to Andy Thibault. And Andy, I mean, do you just try to kind of, tickle the ivories as it relates to authority, or is it just that authority has so many levers available to them, and you just want to kind of square it up a little bit? For example, there's a quote here from Howard Zinn, who, of course, has written about your work. It doesn't matter what the First Amendment says. It matters who has the power to enforce it.
That's right. I took some heat for coming down on Sonia Sotomayor when she was in the Second Circuit, because she was part of a ruling that said it's okay to steal free speech T-shirts from kids in high school. What kind of country is that? What a joke, you know? I mean, the cop on the beat, the teacher in the classroom, the boss at work, they got the power, you know?
Well, here's a guy who's been trying to square it up and put somebody in their corner for a long period of time. Andy Thibault will come back, wrap things up, and tell people where they can get a more taste of cool justice, where you're going to be promoting this book, More Cool Justice, in just a moment here on WATR.
Hello, everyone.
All right, I found this half hour fascinating, all over the map with Andy Thibault, but we're going to be able to pin him down on Friday, October 10th, the Hickory Stick Bookshop. That's in Washington Depot, and they are letting people in from the Waterbury area for this event. Okay, so we're really happy about that. The reception is at 6:30, featuring the acclaimed jazz musicians Chris and Jen Allen. But then we have to go back to where we came from, right?
I don't know. They got plenty of room out there.
I'm only kidding. What are you working on today? We have about a minute.
Well, my friend Louis DeCoin, the world's greatest counterfeiter from Providence, has a manuscript that I've been working on with my other friend, Franz Dusky, who has a good book about Tony Consiglio, Frank Sinatra's boyhood pal. and Louis made $100 slot machine tokens that couldn't be detected, which is why they don't have them anymore. He imported a printing press from Italy, and I had tool and die makers working for him. And I've had appearances with him and one of the cops who arrested him, retired State Police Sergeant Jerry Longo. And Secret Service guys would come to see Louis because everybody who worked on the case got promoted. Louis did 2 years at Fort Dix.
Okay. Do you have any friends left in the state of Connecticut, except for me and Michael London?
Well, most of my friends have done time, but I got a few friends.
All right. Andy Thibault, just an amazing career. Muckraking. You got to pick this up. More Cool Justice. You will enjoy it. 1320 WATR in Waterbury. Have a great week.